What if President Kennedy had survived? What if history had taken a different turn on November 22, 1963? What if President John F. Kennedy had lived through the assassination attempt in Dallas, Texas? How would his survival have reshaped America and the world? These questions ignite the imagination of historians, alternative history enthusiasts, and anyone who wonders how small moments in time can create massive ripple effects. In this video, we'll dive into this fascinating hypothetical scenario, exploring the potential impacts of Kennedy's survival on America's internal dynamics, international relations, and the world at large. Stick around until the end. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Let's begin. To imagine this alternate reality, we first need to understand the world Kennedy knew. The year was 1963, and the United States stood at a crossroads. Domestically, the civil rights movement was gaining momentum, with leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. pressing the government for real action against systemic racial injustices. The economy was thriving, but vast inequalities still posed challenges. On the international stage, the Cold War dominated headlines. The Cuban Missile Crisis was still fresh in the nation's memory, and Vietnam had begun its slow escalation into a full-scale conflict. Kennedy, charismatic and progressive, represented hope and change for many Americans. Whether it was his commitment to civil rights reform, his ambitious goals for the space race, or his vision for a safer, more cooperative world, he was a man seen as being capable of steering the future in a promising direction. But that tragic day in Dallas cut his presidency short, or did it? What could have been different in this alternate timeline? One of the most immediate areas in which Kennedy's survival might have made a difference is the civil rights movement. While Lyndon B. Johnson, his successor, played a critical role in passing landmark legislation like the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Kennedy had already laid important groundwork. Many argue that Kennedy's charm and political skill could have pushed these changes through even faster, potentially avoiding some of the gridlock Johnson experienced. Imagine a scenario where Kennedy continued to actively collaborate with civil rights leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. Would his survival have fast-tracked integration and equality, perhaps preventing some of the delay and resistance the movement faced in the years to follow? Moreover, Kennedy's ability to unite Americans might have offered a smoother path forward, sidestepping some of the immense social unrest of the late 1960s. On a broader scale, his vision of an inclusive America might have helped bridge divides in the long term, fostering a culture of tolerance and understanding earlier in the nation's history. However, even with Kennedy's leadership, systemic change isn't simple. Could his survival still have faced the same entrenched challenges, or might he have surmounted them? Another key question centers on the Vietnam War. By the fall of 1963, Kennedy faced mounting pressure to escalate America's involvement in the region. Many historians wonder if he truly aimed to withdraw U.S. forces, or whether he would have ultimately been swayed by the prevailing Cold War mindset of containment. If Kennedy had survived, one plausible scenario is that he might have resisted the large-scale military escalation orchestrated under Johnson. His approach to foreign policy was characterized by diplomacy and pragmatism, as seen in his handling of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Could Kennedy have sought a negotiated settlement in Vietnam, sparing the nation years of conflict and the subsequent backlash of division at home? On the other hand, Kennedy would have faced substantial opposition from the political and military establishment. Would his reputation for strong leadership have been enough to chart a less destructive course? Or would he, like Johnson, have been drawn into the quagmire of war? Kennedy's survival could have also had profound implications on the broader Cold War. His presidency was defined by tense moments, but his skillful diplomacy offered a potential blueprint for how US-Soviet relations might have continued to evolve. Could his survival have further thawed relations, possibly even accelerating progress toward détente? Let's think about the Cuban Missile Crisis. Kennedy's calm, calculated handling of the standoff averted global catastrophe. With his death, that steady hand was lost. If Kennedy had survived, might he have achieved broader nuclear disarmament agreements or found innovative approaches to reducing Cold War tensions? His potential impact on US-Cuba relations is also fascinating to contemplate. Could Kennedy have found a way to normalize relations with Fidel Castro's government, avoiding decades of hostile tensions that marked U.S.-Cuban diplomacy? On a global scale, his survival could have meant a different trajectory for international alliances. Kennedy was a strong advocate for multilateralism and united efforts against shared challenges. Imagine how his leadership might have influenced the formation of new coalitions or nurtured U.S. partnerships more strongly across Europe, Asia, and Africa. One of Kennedy's signature visions was his commitment to the space race. His bold declaration in 1961 that the U.S. would land a man on the moon before the end of the decade galvanized the nation. With his continued leadership, could the Apollo program have advanced even faster, reaching new milestones and inspiring generations of scientists and innovators? Kennedy's vision extended beyond space exploration. It represented a broader commitment to technological advancement and innovation. In this alternate timeline, would his continued presidency have placed a greater emphasis on national investments in scientific research and education, driving America into an era of progress perhaps decades ahead of its time? Now let's consider the longer-term political implications of Kennedy's survival. Had he lived, Kennedy almost certainly would have run for re-election in 1964 and likely would have won, given his popularity at the time. With a full second term, Kennedy might have solidified his vision of a more progressive America, altering the Democratic Party's trajectory for years to come. But presidential success depends on more than vision. Would Kennedy have been able to maintain his political strength in the face of mounting challenges? Surviving the assassination attempt could have made him even more revered, bolstering his influence, or it could have introduced new vulnerabilities. Furthermore, consider what Kennedy's survival might have meant for the political figures who followed him. Would Johnson, Nixon, Reagan, or others have taken different paths, or even entered the national stage at all? This alternate outcome opens up endless possibilities for how American politics might have unfolded through the decades. Beyond politics and policy, Kennedy's survival would likely have had an impact on American culture and public trust. His assassination became a traumatic touchstone for an entire generation, symbolizing for many the loss of innocence and trust in government. Would this sense of disillusionment have been avoided if Kennedy had lived? Perhaps his continued optimism and dynamic leadership could have fostered a nation more united and less cynical. Imagine also the cultural narratives surrounding hope and resilience. Surviving such a monumental event could have made Kennedy an even more enduring icon, inspiring countless stories, movements, and moments. Of course, much of what we've explored is speculative. The Kennedy presidency was as much defined by vision as by the harsh realities of its era. Even in this alternate timeline, challenges such as entrenched racism, geopolitical tensions, and the unpredictability of history might have limited Kennedy's ambitions. On the other hand, his charisma, leadership, and ability to inspire could have made all the difference. What do you think? Would a surviving President Kennedy have led the US and the world down a brighter path, or would historical forces have continued to shape the world much as we know it? Could specific events like the Vietnam War have been avoided, or was conflict inevitable? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear your take on this alternate history. If you enjoyed this exploration of what-ifs and alternate timelines, please let us know by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. Your support helps us create more thought-provoking content designed to spark curiosity and discussion. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.